Mom, what are you talking about? I send you $1,000 every month. Since my accident, the kind single son said this with a surprised face. It's true, I'm only receiving $50. However, there was a significant difference between the amount the son claimed to send and what she actually received. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. You might think receiving only $50 a month is too little and unusual. But he has also been spending a lot of money on buying useful household appliances for me. But where is the money going? As I wondered about where the money was going, one person came to mind. In fact, I wasn't the one who was withdrawing the transferred money from the bank. It seemed the son realized this too and muttered as if he had an idea. But, could it really be that person? Sensing that both mother and son had the same person in mind, the son shared a shocking truth. I couldn't believe it. It was unforgivable for me, who had struggled with money to raise my son on my own. Then, the son suggested a plan. Indeed, this could allow us to confront that person. There's one more secret weapon, the son said confidently. And with our counterattack. The person who had been smirking behind the scenes plummeted into despair. I am Dorothy. Living apart from my only son Scott, I am a 60-year-old living alone. I married young and was filled with happiness when Scott was born. But a few years later, my husband died of cancer. At that time, there was no support for single mothers, so I raised Scott entirely on my own. Thankfully, we received assistance from both families. So though we weren't wealthy, we managed to live. The hardest time was the 4 years after Scott entered university. Unlike me, Scott was academically gifted and went to a national university. We couldn't afford to send him to a private university, so I was really glad he did his best. However, living alone out of the state, managing the finances for his tuition and living expenses was tough. Scott also spent much time working part-time jobs, likely not enjoying the typical fun university life. But thanks to his efforts, he landed a job at a famous company and became a respectable working adult, busy every day. However, for several years after getting employed, Scott was overworked. Having no significant educational background myself, I naively thought that highly educated people could earn money more easily. Even with a good education, one has to work hard. Still, it's true that working hard does increase one's income. The days spent with Scott were filled with hardships and worries about money, but not all was bad. The 20 years of supporting each other strengthened our bond as mother and son. He still cares about my well-being. Even when he had just started his job, he wanted to send money home, but I declined. I have my own pride, and I couldn't simply rely on Scott, who was doing his best. I also have my pride as a mother. But, of course, I was happy that Scott was considerate in that way. Even after Scott became independent, we kept in touch often. But at some point, the contact became less frequent. I felt lonely, but I realized it was time for me to let go. Just as I was thinking this, Scott introduced me to a woman. Her name is Kelly, and he said they were dating. We've been dating for a few months now, and we're considering marriage. Scott seemed happy, saying it was about time at his age. Before I knew it, Scott was 32 years old. Indeed, it might be about time to settle down. Kelly was 5 years younger than Scott, at 26, and they met through a colleague's introduction. Her round eyes are charming, and she dressed cleanly, so cute like a doll. Even as a woman, I couldn't help but be enchanted by her. Mother, it's nice to meet you, thank you for meeting me. Her demeanor was very polite, and her actions were graceful. I never imagined Scott would catch such a cute girl. Until then, I had never heard any love stories from Scott, so I was as happy as could be. Although my husband passed away early and I couldn't have a daughter, I always wanted one. And now, in such a manner, such a lovely daughter has come into our lives. It pays off to live long and try hard. Half a year after their initial meeting, Scott and Kelly registered their marriage. The wedding preparation was hectic. Since I had no husband, I had to prepare everything for the wedding myself. At the reception, I gave a speech in front of many people for the first time in my life. I was so preoccupied with the speech during the reception that I couldn't fully enjoy my son's big day, even though I was happy to see him in his finest. After the reception, I truly felt that my role as a parent was finally over. Honey, I've done it. But, knowing or not, my husband in the photo just smiled back. I'll have a lot to complain about when I see you there. Finally feeling weight lifted off my shoulders, I began to lead a calm life again. However, trouble often follows fortune. Life is full of ups and downs. Good and bad things happen in life. Recently, while returning from shopping, I collided with a car at an intersection and broke my leg. I was taken to the hospital by an ambulance and was admitted immediately. You've also got a crack in your rib, but you should be okay. You're lucky. Just to be safe, we'll do another CT scan of your head tomorrow. However, the fracture in your leg will require surgery. Rehabilitation will take some time. I was diagnosed with a proximal femoral fracture, which I had heard was a common cause of immobility among the elderly. To think I could become bedridden at my age. Scott was very worried and started visiting me daily. Scott, I'm happy to see you, but you're a newlywed. You should cherish your time with Kelly more than worrying about me. It's okay. Kelly is also very worried about you. Let us worry for now. Fortunately, the surgery went well. However, the hardest part was after that, enduring pain during rehabilitation. The most difficult part was using the toilet. Not being able to go to the toilet when I wanted was a great pain. Especially at the beginning of rehabilitation when I had to use a portable toilet next to my bed. It was tough with people in the same room and they could hear my sounds. And also it was depressing to ask the nurses for help every time I had to move. The joy of being able to go to the toilet on my own as rehabilitation progressed was immense. Later, I was transferred to a rehabilitation hospital and continued rehabilitation until I could move sufficiently to be discharged. However, the problems weren't limited to my physical condition. The driver who collided with me paid for the hospital fees, which was a relief. But the biggest issue was how to manage living expenses. Since Scott started working, I had been working part-time and didn't have much savings. I still felt pain in my leg and had to apply for disability benefits. But the benefits weren't enough to live on without working for a long time. It's troubling. Can I really live on my own? After being discharged, I could go to a daily rehabilitation, which would take care of lunch and bathing. However, money was still the biggest concern. Dark clouds began to loom over my once smooth-sailing life. Mother, are you okay? Living alone at home was worrisome, but something unexpected happened. Kelly, who became a full-time housewife after marriage, started to take care of me. She was doing household tasks in place of the busy Scott. I have plenty of time. She says this as she comes to the house to match my rehabilitation schedule, doing the cleaning, laundry, and meal preparation without a frown, efficiently handling everything. I'm sorry, dear. You're newlyweds, and you should be spending time together. Now you have to take care of two households' chores. Please don't worry about it. Scott comes home late from work, and I was feeling lonely anyway. Kelly smiles wryly. Despite being busy with work, I can't help thinking I need to have a word with him for leaving such a cute wife to fend for herself. But the new washing machine and the automatic cleaning robot that Scott prepared have been a big help. Scott had arranged these to make household chores a bit easier for me upon my discharge from the hospital. I used to think people should just do their own housework. People these days are so lazy. But having used these, I truly appreciate the convenience. And that cleaning robot, its diligent movement is somehow endearing. Still, don't overdo it, okay? But the help didn't stop there. Scott also began sending money to help with living expenses. Mom, I want to start giving back, even if it's just a little at a time. Initially, I was hesitant to accept it, but honestly, it was a relief. I had refused before, but circumstances have changed, and it's not the time to be stubborn. This time, I gratefully accepted. Kelly withdrew the money during her shopping trips. Mother, here you go. I hadn't mentioned how much to send, so I was curious and looked inside to find $50. It might be a small amount, but it was a welcome addition to our grocery funds. Scott had also prepared other household appliances. Living with Kelly is also a part of it. It's the thought that counts, not the amount. Just knowing they care gives me more strength in rehabilitation. It's not a large sum, but with the benefit money, it looks like we'll manage for a while. However, rehabilitation took time. I could manage basic movements of daily life, but not enough to return to work. I have no special qualifications or career history. Having only done physical jobs like cashier work, I began to feel anxious. My savings were slowly dwindling. But I couldn't bear to rely anymore on the young couple and had to act strong. During this time, Kelly continued to visit. But I managed to do meal preparations. And only needed help with tasks requiring strength and going out, like shopping and withdrawals. Kelly's visits eventually decreased to about once a week when Scott came to visit. How have things been since then, Mom? It had been months since we last saw each other. He must be working hard to support both Kelly and me. I tell him it's okay, but Scott is not convinced. Really? You seem a bit, not yourself. I reassured him it was okay, but Scott, sensing my anxiety, kept asking. Are you sure about the money? Everything's getting more expensive. And it's tough, isn't it? Do you really think you can work? Be honest with me. Giving in to Scott's insistence, I finally shared the truth about my financial struggles. I'm sorry. I should have kept working full-time. I had switched to part-time work, hoping to relax a bit after Scott became independent. Never imagining I'd regret it like this. Stop it, Mom. Scott grabbed my shoulders firmly. It's my fault. Thinking a woman living alone could get by on $1,000 was absurd. What? $1,000? What are you talking about, Scott? Seeing my puzzled face, Scott continues. How much more do you need? No, Scott. It's not about how much more I need. Wait a minute, Scott. What's this about $1,000? I'm only getting $50 a month? Now it's Scott's turn to be stunned. $50? Mom, you're only getting $50? Yes, that's right. Kelly gives it to me every month, but... Could it be? But... Then, Scott starts muttering to himself before he finally looks up. And begins to explain something to me. The following month, as usual, my daughter-in-law visited once a week to take care of things. She went shopping as usual. While waiting at home for Kelly to return, I received a call from her. When I answered, Kelly's voice sounded rushed. Mother, the money from Scott is only $50. Do you know anything about this? Huh? I have no idea. It's always been $50, so isn't that right? Scott said he'd transfer more than usual because you seem to be having a hard time? Is that so? But now that you mention it, he did say something about electronic money. But I'm clueless about that stuff. I'll ask Scott myself. No, it's okay. I'll check it myself. With that, Kelly hurriedly ended the call. Now, where could it be going? Then, I decided to call Scott. Oh, Mom? Don't worry, Kelly is on her way. According to the plan, she should be meeting that guy 2 weeks ago, when Scott visited and talked about the remittance. That day, he revealed a shocking truth. Scott had been sending me $1,000 every month since he started to support me financially. However, I was only receiving $50. There could only be one explanation. Yes, Kelly was skimming from the remittance money. Mom, you only gave her the cash card, right? Yes, you don't need a passbook just to withdraw money. So, you wouldn't know the transfer history, Scott points out. Indeed, that's true. I rarely check the passbook. When was the last time I did that, anyway? Using that to her advantage, Kelly has been deceiving you. With my limited mobility, I wouldn't know about the transfer history if it wasn't in the passbook. But even so, why would she do such a thing? You earn well, so why would she need to worry about money? Kelly's usual demeanor didn't suggest she was struggling. She was always neat, and her clothes seemed newly bought per season. Scott continues. Actually, there's been something odd about Kelly lately. Even though she says she's helping you, she's been coming home late at night more frequently. Scott explains further. Kelly had many friends, and often went out for meals even from the early days of their marriage. With his busy schedule, Scott felt bad for making her feel lonely and accepted it. However, the frequency of her outings increased over time. But then, I was discharged from the hospital and she started helping out more. Considering she was taking care of household chores for 2 families and assisting me. He understood she might want some stress relief and didn't think much of it. But as time passed, I too began to recover somewhat. Despite this, Kelly's late returns continued. Suspecting something was amiss, Scott hired a detective and discovered that Kelly frequently visited a nightclub. However, it's true that Scott was always busy with work and didn't spend much time with Kelly. He struggled with how to confront the issue. Lately, Kelly only visits about once a week, right? But she tells me she's been seeing you every day. Scott's hand had fallen from my shoulder and he looked down. Disheartened, clearly troubled by the situation. But this was unforgivable. Just as I was about to express my concern for Scott, he looked up again and exclaimed, "I can deal with our marital issues. I know I'm not perfect. But what I cannot forgive is the theft from you, Mom." He was visibly shaking with anger now. "I'm sure the stolen money is being squandered on a guy at a nightclub." "Oh, really? On something like that? You might not know, Mom, but with those places, you can splurge endlessly if you want to. They always pamper their wealthy clients, and she must have gotten carried away. But what should we do now?" I was at a loss, facing this unforeseen revelation. "Don't worry, I have a plan." Scott then outlined his strategy to me. "Act as usual, but with a twist. We'd pretend to transfer double the usual living expenses, $2,000. Letting Kelly think she had more to splurge, especially with her favorite guy's birthday approaching. It seems it's customary to spend lavishly on them for their birthdays. To make a good impression. The plan was to catch Kelly off guard with a substantial amount of money. But would that be enough? Sensing my concern, Scott reassured me. "It's okay. There's one more secret weapon." "A secret weapon?" Full of confidence, Scott seemed sure of his plan. I didn't understand all the details, but I trusted Scott. After all, Kelly's betrayal, pretending everything was fine while deceiving us, was unforgivable. Ending the call with Scott, I headed to a certain location, the nightclub Kelly frequented. Using a taxi, I arrived near the nightclub, where Scott was already waiting. "Mom, over here." He motioned to me from a distance and then guided me to a vantage point. "Look over there," he instructed, pointing from behind the building. There were Kelly and the guy she was infatuated with, apparently arguing. She's probably being scolded by the guy because she didn't bring enough money. Being scolded by the worker at a nightclub? Kelly was the client, right? I couldn't grasp this world at all. Let's go, Scott said, and we approached Kelly together. As we got closer, their conversation became audible. The guy was clearly upset, likely over money, while Kelly was trying to defend herself. Hey, Kelly, what are you doing here? Scott greeted the arguing pair casually, though he must have been boiling inside. Startled by his voice, Kelly turned to look at us, her face turning pale. Meanwhile, the guy confronts us, saying, "What do you want?" "And you, has my wife caused any trouble?" Scott responds calmly. "Wife? Oh, I see. Later then." With that, the guy seemed to understand the situation and quickly retreated back into the nightclub. "Wait, Tom, wait for me." Kelly, perhaps scared of being left alone, panicked. But the guy doesn't look back. Illustrating the saying that money can end relationships just as quickly as it can start them. It was a rare real-life example of this saying. Now, Kelly, care to explain what's going on? As Scott tapped Kelly on the shoulder asking for an explanation. She turned around and glared at him fiercely. "It's all your fault. You're always at work, even though we're newlyweds. You don't pay any attention to me. And then there's suddenly caregiving for your mother? You've got to be joking." "I admit, I have my faults. But tampering with the money meant for my mom is crossing the line." "Shut up. It's ridiculous to expect me to provide care without any compensation. This is, like, legitimate caregiving. Do you know how much more it would cost if she were in a facility?" Back and forth they go, but not everything Kelly says is entirely wrong. Kelly is still in her 20s. And it would be normal for her and Scott to enjoy their time together as a couple. "I understand I've put a lot of pressure on you and made you feel lonely. If you know that then. But it turns out you've been coming here even before we got married." At this point, a new fact I was unaware of comes to light. "What do you mean, before we got married?" It seems the detective Scott hired was thorough enough to dig up Kelly's history of visiting nightclubs, which dates back to her university days. She has had a long-standing relationship with that guy, Tom. Realizing her secret is out, Kelly's demeanor changes. That was, well, just for fun. Her responses become hesitant, unlike before. "I never thought you were that kind of person." Scott, in a cold voice, pressed on. "Actually, there's someone I'd like you to meet." Suddenly, Scott gestured towards someone behind Kelly. And the person who appeared was none other than Frank. "Kelly, what's all this?" The person who appeared was Kelly's father, Frank. Seeing him, Kelly's face turned even paler, her complexion worsening significantly. "Dad, this is, well..." Kelly stammered, unable to articulate her situation clearly. "You haven't grown up at all." Frank slaps Kelly across the face. The impact from the sturdy Frank is significant, causing Kelly to collapse to the ground. "I'm terribly sorry." Instead of the immobilized Kelly, Frank apologized deeply. "It's also my responsibility she turned out this way. If it's money, I'll make Kelly work and ensure she pays it back properly." Frank reveals a shocking detail. Kelly had been frequenting nightclubs since her student days and once couldn't pay, leading Frank to cover for her. After that incident, he strictly told her not to visit nightclubs and gave her only a minimal amount of money, buying necessary items like clothes in his presence to ensure she wouldn't spend irresponsibly. Thanks to such management, Kelly stopped visiting nightclubs and seemed to have become independent after finding a job. "I thought she was mature enough to handle marriage responsibly, but I was mistaken." When she was single, Kelly didn't have much money to spare for nightclubs. But marrying Scott and having access to more disposable income sparked the old habit. Scott's busy work schedule gave Kelly a pretext to contact the guy again. I could manage the money somehow if I asked Scott, and it was fun. Resigned to her fate, Kelly smugly explained her actions, devoid of her usual charm. She looked like she was a totally different person, showing her true self. That day, Frank took Kelly home. A divorce proceeding will now be planned. Phew, that was exhausting. After Frank and Kelly left, Scott sat down, seemingly relieved of the tension. Shall we grab something to eat before heading back? When I suggested that, Scott laughed and agreed.
Yeah.
It's Scott's kind smile as always. We headed to a diner. Back in the days when money was tight, dining out was a rare treat. We visited an affordable but delicious diner run by a lively owner and his kind wife. As usual, I ordered a meatloaf, and Scott chose fried chicken. We both said, thankful for the food. Our voices overlapped. Despite having a bit more financial breathing room now, this flavor somehow feels like happiness. During the divorce proceedings, various facts about the money emerged. Frank is the president of a company that operates several care facilities. Kelly had lied to Scott about the company's financial troubles, asking for money, which she then funneled into the nightclubs, getting addicted again. However, Frank's company was actually doing well. I often hear that the care industry is struggling, so I never doubted her. Kelly had been cleverly collecting money for her purposes. The care situation I faced was probably just a convenient excuse for her. Frank was furious upon learning everything. He seemed to want to cut ties, but felt it was his responsibility to supervise Kelly until she repaid all the money she had taken from Scott. This is utterly disappointing. His voice over the phone sounded deeply discouraged. Scott considered pressing criminal charges and demanding compensation. But Frank asked him to reconsider. Of course, she'll pay compensation. But, please, no criminal charges. Perhaps it's a parent's heart. Frank's stance was also because pressing charges might not ensure full compensation recovery. Instead, under Frank's supervision, ensuring Kelly pays damages seemed more beneficial. So we decided not to file criminal charges. This decision was somewhat worrying for Scott, but he accepted. Well, paperwork and all seem like a hassle. And it's probably better not to take on unnecessary stress. It's unclear how he truly feels, but unexpectedly, they reached an agreement with Frank for me to move into one of his managed care facilities with rehabilitation services. All for a significantly reduced fee of $50 a month. Are you sure? We don't need to take your money. While Frank's offer was generous, it didn't seem right to overly rely on someone else for my situation. Somehow, the amount of $50 came to mind, with the remainder covered by Kelly's earnings. Considering the compensation and my care costs, it's hard to imagine how long Kelly will have to work. It's a daunting thought, knowing all too well the hardship of a life without money. But I can't feel sympathy. I want her to truly understand the value of money and how hard it is to earn it. And now, somewhat belatedly, the compensation for the traffic accident was deposited. Given the inconvenience caused to my life, a substantial amount was compensated. Including the compensation from Kelly, it became a significant sum. I won't have to worry about living arrangements or financial resources for the foreseeable future. However, no amount of money stirred my heart. Back when I was working tirelessly and raising Scott, I yearned for money as if it was everything. But now, looking back, I realize I had gained something far more valuable than money. Hey, Mom, how are you feeling? Scott, still busy with work, occasionally checks in. Today is one of our days to go out for dinner together. What do you want for lunch? I wonder, maybe that same place? Again? We could go somewhere nicer now, you know? Scott jests, but to me, dining there with him is what brings joy. We head to the diner, chatting about trivial matters along the way. What should I order today? I think I'll go with fried chicken. Despite everything, Scott seems to stick with his usual choice. Then, my order is clear. Excuse me, fried chicken for him, please. And meatloaf for me.